Hello everyone, welcome to DineSQL. My name is Dinesh Priyankara, Data Platform MVP and Business Intelligence Architect. Here is my third video on Azure Data Factory, and we'll be talking about Lookup and ForEach Activity. Let me show you what I have planned for this video. First, let's talk about a scenario. Where should I iterate a data collection and why I really need it? And then I'll take you through a set of slides that explain lookup activity and for each activity. Once everything is discussed, I'll take you through a demo that shows the usage of this lookup and for each activity. If you are new to Azure Data Factory, I highly recommend you to go through my first two videos related to Azure Data Factory. These two videos discuss things like link services, datasets, integration runtime, how to access on-premise data, how to access cloud containers like Azure Data Lake Store, and how to create a pipeline using author tab, or how to get the pipeline created using the wizard. So you have to know these basic implementation related to Azure Data Factory in order to continue with the advanced part. So if you are new to this Azure Data Factory, watch these two videos and then continue with this video. Let's try to understand why we really have to iterate a data collection. Let's talk about a scenario. Assume that you have a business user who really needs to get some weather forecast done based on the postal codes. So if you have the postal code, you can create a pipeline and connect with something like weathersource.com, connect with their API, and then pass the postal code and get the data into your environment. So your environment could be a SQL database or Azure Data Lake Store, whatever the container. So you can do something like that if you know the postal code. But if business user says that postal codes cannot be given immediately, whenever I want weather forecast for these postal codes, I should be able to use your implementation. So if you see a scenario like that, which means you'll be getting postal codes like this, and you need to make sure that you read whatever the given postal codes and then get these weather forecast details into business users environment. So since we don't get hard-coded data sets saying these are the postal codes, we need to have a different mechanism to read these postal codes and then getting these weather forecast details into our environment. So let's see how we can implement something like this with Azure Data Factory. First of all, I need to have a container that contains all these postal codes. Again, business user can submit these postal codes to a table, or business user can submit all these postal codes using a CSV file. It's up to us to read it and make sure we read entire set and keep it as a container. So that's what we are going to use for continuing with the next step. So in order to get these weather forecast details, we need to create a pipeline, or we need to create a flow. So assume that this is our flow. All we need is to have something like copy activity using HTTP request. I can call, for example, weathersource.com API by passing this postal code and get weather forecast detail into my environment or my ADF environment. And if this data has to be saved in, for example, Azure Data Lake Store, I can simply pass it to Azure Data Lake Store. And again, I can update a table or some sort of object saying we have loaded weather forecast details for this postal code. So this is what we really want to get it done. But now if you think about this second flow, we need to make sure this flow can be repeatedly executed based on the values coming from the lookup. This is where we use for each activity. So for each activity can take data from lookup and then iterate through whatever the items available in the lookup data set and execute or performs activities we have implemented inside for each. So this is how it works inside ADF. Let's talk about lookup activity. So lookup activity allows us to connect with a data source and get a data set loaded into ADF environment, and then use loaded items with subsequent activities. ADF supports large number of data sources, so which means lookup activity can connect with all those data sources that ADF supports. But when we try to refer the output coming from lookup activity, I can instruct to ADF saying all I need is just the first record. The first record might have multiple columns, but I can simply say all I need is the first record. So we consider the output as singleton value. If I really want to get the entire data set, which means all columns, all rows, then I can consider my output, or I can configure my output as an array of attributes. But remember, lookup can load maximally 5,000 records or rows into a lookup container. If you think about the amount, it is limited to 2 MB in size. Just remember that limitation, but you may see that different values with this limitation with future versions. Let's try to understand how I can refer output related to lookup with other activities. Now we talk about singleton and array of attributes. There's a property called first row only. If I have set this first row only as true, which is a default, I'll be getting only one record. So in that case, if I want to refer a column coming from my data set, this is how the expression has to be written. Assume that I'm referring a data set that has two columns, ID and code, and since I have set the property called first row only as true, I'll be getting only one record, which means ID has 100, code has CD001. So if I want to refer the code, the expression has to be written like activity and the name of the lookup output. I need to use first row property and the column name. So if I use the column name as code, I'll be getting CD001. If I use the column name as ID, I'll be getting 100. So I can refer first row property. So I can use first row property only when I have set first row only property as true. If I have set this as false, which means I'm expecting multiple records. So for example, I'm getting 3 records from my data sets now. So in that case, if I want to refer items or the entire set, I can simply say, or I can write the expression like activity name of the lookup output dot value. This represents the entire data set, not just one column, not just one record, entire record set. But if I want to read a specific value from specific instance, I can simply pass the index ID and then refer the column. For example, if I write the expression like activity name of the lookup output value within bracket 0, which means I'm requesting the first instance of my data set and the code column, then I'll be getting CD001. But sometimes rather than just passing the index, we have to read it dynamically. Now we are going to talk about for each activity. Inside the for each activity, we don't need to pass the index. There's a function called item that can be simply referred to that can be simply used for referring the current instance. So I can simply write item.code. It will give the current code based on the iteration. So we'll talk about it with the for each activity as well. So this is how you refer lookup outputs through expressions. Now let's try to understand for each activity. So for each activity allows you to create a control flow. It is something like you're creating a data flow in the SSIS control flow. Okay, you can add a data flow into control flow and go into it and configure multiple tasks. It is very similar. So you can drag and drop for each activity to your canvas, and then you can configure your operation inside it. You can have multiple activities. For example, you can have multiple stored procedure execution, multiple copy operation, multiple USQL statements. So you can configure the flow, and then you can connect your for each activity with your lookup in order to get it executed repeatedly based on the values coming from the lookup. When you get your for each loop executed, you can set the loop execution as either as sequential or parallel. So it's something like this. If you think about the scenario we discussed, we talk about getting postal codes from lookup and then execute multiple activities based on the postal code. If I have set the lookup execution as sequential, it will take the first postal code and then perform whatever the activities you have added inside the for each and complete that iteration. Then it will take the next postal code and continue with the same set of activities. That's how it works if you have set the loop execution as sequential. But if you have set as parallel, it will take the first postal code and then execute whatever the activities you have added inside the for each, but it does not wait until it completes the first iteration. It takes the second postal code and do the same, because the whole operation can be executed, performed in parallel manner. But you need to make sure that you don't expect any conflicts because of these parallel operations. For example, if you are trying to update a table in one of your SQL Server databases, there can be a situation where you see some conflicts because of the logs. So be careful with the parallel loop execution type, but it will definitely speed up your operation. It will definitely improve the performance of your ADF pipeline. You can set items or data collection to for each activity using multiple techniques. For example, we talk about lookup activity. If you have connected lookup activity with for each activity, then for each activity can read the data set coming from the lookup activity and then iterate through the data collection. That's one way. Or else you can define a data set, and then data set can be passed as a parameter to for each activity. For each activity can use that data set for continuing whatever the operations you have added inside the for each activity. So it should be a JSON array. That's all it wants. So how can I refer values in iteration or inside for each activity? Now, in order to read items, I can simply write an expression saying item. That's a function. I can simply write an expression saying item open close bracket. That is how you refer the entire array. But if you need to get a specific one, I can simply say item open close dot whatever the column I really need to read. So when I refer a code based on the current iteration, it will give me the value. It can be, if it is the first iteration, I'll be getting CD001 for this expression. If it is the second iteration, I'll be getting CD002 as the value for this expression. In addition to that, I can get some additional details too within this for each activity. For example, if I want to find out the time it has spent on an inner activity defined in for each activity. For example, let's say I have a stored procedure activity inside my for each activity. I want to find out the time it has spent on that specific stored procedure activity. So in that case, I can write an expression like activity, the name of the inactivity, for example, stored procedure 01, output execution duration. Remember, these property, the name of these properties are different from activity to activity. You will see execution duration property with stored procedure, but you're not going to see the same with copy activity. You will see with the demo. Okay, so let's see how we can use these lookup and for each activities with our ADF. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the demo as very simple demo. So I'll be connecting with my on-premise SQL Server database, get some data, and then use that data set as my data collection. I'll be iterating that data collection and read one by one, and then perform some additional activities based on the values or based on the data I have loaded. That's what I'm going to show you. So first of all, let me show you the SQL database I'm going to access and some of the stored procedures and tables that will be used with this demo. Okay, let me show you the database I'm going to use for this demo, and some stored procedures and tables I have created for this demo. Okay, so I'm going to use my local SQL instance. This is my local SQL instance, and I have already installed integration runtime. So my ADF environment can connect with my local SQL database. If you want to know how to create an integration runtime and connect with local SQL Server instance, please refer the previous video. Okay, now let me show you the objects I have created inside the AdventureWorks database. I'm going to use AdventureWorks database. So inside it I have created stored procedure which is called get product categories. So this returns product category ID and category. If I execute this stored procedure, you can see it returns the ID and the category. So the next one is I'm trying to get sales for the given product category. The whole idea is inside the for each activity, I'll be taking one of the categories and then trying to get sales for that category, and then the result will be saved in Azure Data Lake Store. So in order to get sales for given product category, I'll be using this stored procedure. It's a very simple stored procedure. You can see I have made some joins between order header, details, product, subcategory and category. So it's all about getting this product category and setting with the where clause, and in addition to that, just to limit the number of records, I have filtered for one of the years. So once this stored procedure is added, I can execute. For example, if I pass a category like bikes to this stored procedure, I'll be getting a record set like this. So it has 3 columns. In addition to that, I have created a table called processing details. I want to make sure that I record some processing details related to this activity. So for example, when my for each activity calls this stored procedure and then generates the result sets and saves the data into my Azure Data Lake Store, I want to record it saying what is the category and how long it has taken for the entire processing. So I'll be recording it in this table which is called demo.processing details, and in order to update this table, I have created a stored procedure that accepts the category and the duration. So I need to call this stored procedure again inside my for each activity and pass these 2 values for getting things recorded. Okay, so this is the database environment. Now let's go to ADF environment, create a pipeline and configure lookup and web activity. Okay, I have opened my portal and I have connected with my Azure Data Factory account, and I have opened my editor. Okay, so I'm going to create a new pipeline. I can click on this plus icon and select pipeline, and I'm going to name this pipeline as demo lookup and for each. So that's going to be the name of my pipeline. Now the first part is getting my categories. Let me go back to my SQL environment and show you what I have to access. So I need to make sure that I call this stored procedure and I'll be getting these 2 columns. So what I want is a lookup, because I want to hold that result set for continuing with my subsequent activities. So lookup is available under general. I can drag and drop lookup activity to this canvas, and I'm going to name this lookup as lookup categories. That's the name of it. And let me click on settings. So you know that everything needs a data set. So I'm going to create a data set, and data set is a SQL Server data set because I'm extracting data from SQL Server. Let me click on new. I have to search for SQL Server, selected, click on finish. Now I'm creating my data set. So I'm going to call this data set as SQL Server table underscore categories. So that's going to be my data set related to my lookup. So let me go into connection tab and select the link service. I have already created the link service for connecting with my local SQL Server instance. It is based on the integration runtime or self-hosted integration runtime that have been installed in my machine. Again, if you need more details on this, please refer the first and second videos. So let me select the link service that have been already created. Now I don't want to select a table because all I need is to get that stored procedure executed and get the data loaded. So since I'm not going to select a table, I have to define the schema. I know that I'm expecting two columns from that get categories stored procedure. So I'm going to click on new column two times. Then let me fill this. So I added the product category and product category ID and category columns as the schema, and the data type for this is integer 32, and category is of course string. Schema is done, so data set is ready. Okay, so let me go back to my pipeline. I can see the data set is ready now. Dataset name has been set as SQL Server table underscore categories. Now I want to get data loaded for this. So let me select stored procedure. Since I have connected with my local instance through this data set, I should see all my stored procedure. Let me expand this drop down and search for demo. I can see get product categories stored procedure now. Let me select it. And I know that there are no parameters for this. So I don't want to click on import parameter, or I don't want to add additional parameters. But one thing we need to do, you remember this property, first row only. By default, it is set, which means this lookup will just return only the first record, but we need all records. So in that case, I need to uncheck this. Now this lookup will return multiple records. Okay, so the first part is done. Let me go back to general and copy this name, because I'm going to use this name with my next activity. Now the next activity is for each. I want to perform some task based on the categories uh, uh, extracted, or based on the categories returned from this lookup categories. So let me get for each activity into this canvas. If I scroll down, I can see a category called iteration and conditional. Let me expand it. I can see multiple activities. Let me drag and drop for each activity and make the connection. Okay, so I have the for each activity. Let me name this as for each categories. You can name as you want. Let me go to the settings. Right now, I need to tell ADF saying that whatever the activities I'm going to add inside my for each activity, they should be executed in parallel or in sequential manner. But in this case, I want to make sure all the activities I'm going to add to my for each are getting executed in sequential manner. So let me select this. Right now, what are the items, what's the collection that has to be used with this for each activity? We know that we have to refer the lookup category or lookup categories lookup for setting items for each. So I can click here and write the function, or else I can click on this add dynamic content and write the expression here. So let me write the expression. Let me say activity, within bracket I need to set the lookup name, and all I need is output dot value. So if I refer output dot value, the entire collection from lookup will be passed to for each. So let me click on finish. Now I have set the collection to my for each. Again, it is based on the lookup. Right now, let's go for the activity tab. I can go to activities tab and click on add activity for creating multiple activities inside for each, or else I can double click on this for each activity and get the new canvas open. So when I go into new canvas, which means I'm inside for each activity, I can set certain set of things. Okay, so inside this, what we have to do is call the stored procedure which we have written for getting sales based on the category, and then read the data set and save it in my Azure Data Lake store. Okay, let me show you my Azure Data Lake store. I have created a folder called sales. If I go into sales, you can see it is an empty folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my sales data files saved into this folder. Let me go back to my Azure Data Factory pipeline. Okay, so I need to make sure I use copy activity for calling the stored procedure and then the getting data from my SQL Server database and saving loaded data into my Azure Data Lake folder. So let me expand data flow and drag and drop copy. See, I'm in my for each categories activity, right? So copy, let me name this as sales from SQL to Azure Data Lake Store. Right. So what's the source? I need to connect with my stored procedure. So it's going to be a SQL Server data set. Let me click on new, search for SQL Server on-prem one, select it, click on finish. I'm going to create a new data set for that. So it's going to be SQL Server table. So I'm going to name it as SQL Server table underscore sales. And let me go for connection. Again, I'm going to use the existing connection I have already created. I'm not going to use a table. I'm going to use a stored procedure. Because of that, I need to create the schema. Let me go back to my management studio and show the stored procedure and the result of the stored procedure. So this is stored procedure we are going to call, which is called get sales, which expects product category, and I'll be getting three columns: order date, purchase order number, and amount. Let me add these three columns into my dataset schema. Okay. Okay, I have added three columns. Let me set data types. Order date is date time, and purchase order number is string, and amount is decimal. Okay, that data set also done. Let me go back to my pipeline again. Now, uh, in copy activity, we have set the data set, but we need to instruct to ADF saying this data set has to be loaded using the stored procedure we have written. So let me select stored procedure and let me search for the stored procedure, which is get sales. I know that this expects a parameter. So let me click on import parameter. I should see the parameter, right? So it expects product category. Now I need to make sure that I pass the category, not just hard coding it. I need to make sure that I pass the value coming from my lookup. So we know that we can refer the value related to current iteration using item function. So let me click on add dynamic content and write the expression like at item open close bracket, and the name should be category. So that's a column I'm going to use for this stored procedure. So I will be passing the category to stored procedure and will be getting data into this environment. Let me click on finish. Everything is done. Let me go for the sink or the destination. So the destination is Azure Data Lake Store. I need to create a new data set with the same schema. Let me click on new. This time it is Azure Data Lake. Click on finish. I'll name this as ADLS sales, and the connection, I have already created the link service for Azure Data Lake. So let me select it. Remember, in order to access Azure Data Lake, you need to have permission. So again, permission has to be set with app registration. Everything is discussed in the first and second video. So refer first and second video for understanding how to access Azure Data Lake Store and how to set permission for performing various operations using ADF. Right. So what's the directory? Sales, file name. So since we are creating multiple files for each and every category we are getting through the lookup, it is always better to make the file name also as dynamic. So let me click on add dynamic content. So I'll be writing the file name like something like this. Let's say sales underscore, and I want to combine this with category. Okay, so this is how I'm going to create the file, and let me add the extension as txt. right? So I need to combine all these three string values. I can use concat function for that. So this is how I'm going to form my file: sales, item category, and text. Let me click on finish. That part is done, and you don't need to worry about other part. Go for the schema and create the schema, because we are expecting three columns from the stored procedure or the get sales stored procedure. So we are going to have same three columns in our text files. So I'm going to add three new columns for this data set, and let me fill it. Okay, let me set the data types for these three. So it's just like the previous one. So I'll be having string for purchase order and decimal for amount. So that part is done. So let me go back to my pipeline. So the sync has been done, and if I go for mapping now, I can simply map a data set related to my source and data set related to my sync. I can do it by clicking import schema. I should see three columns from my source and three columns from my sync, and those three should be automatically mapped. Everything looks perfect. I can continue. Right, so the copy activity has been completed. I'm going to add one more activity because I want to update my detail table. So in order to update my detail table, remember we have already written a stored procedure. So I'm going to call that stored procedure inside this for each activity. Let me drag and drop stored procedure activity to this and make a connection. So stored procedure, let me name this as update details and SQL account. So I have the account. I'll be connecting with my local SQL server. And what's the stored procedure? So it is update processing details, and we know that it has two parameters. Let me click on import parameters. I should see two parameters. Okay, I can see two parameters, duration and product category. So let me set the duration. Now duration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the time it has spent for this copy operation, and then I'll be passing that value to stored procedure. And for the product category, of course, we'll be passing the name of the category. So let me click on add dynamic content for this, and I'll be writing the expression like this. So it should be activity and the name of your inner activity, which is in this case copy sales from SQL to ADLS, and then output and copy duration. So remember, this property is available only with copy activity. So activity to activity, you'll be seeing different type of properties. So you need to find out the related property and then refer if you want to get values like this. Let me click on finish for that, and I need to add the value for the second parameter too. So that's going to be the category. I can simply say item, open close bracket, and category. Let me click on finish. All looks okay. Let me go back to the main canvas. So I can see my items. First one is lookup, second one is for each. Inside the for each, I have a copy. It takes data from my SQL database and store it in my Azure Azure Data Lake store, and then it updates one of my tables in my local database. Let me go back to this, and I'm going to click on debug before publishing it. So let's see whether this works. Okay, so I click on debug, execution started. I can see the lookup is getting executed. I can see my for each activity has started, and the first activity in my for each activity, which is copy sales or the copy activity, it is being executed, and the stored procedure has been updated, and the record has been inserted through the stored procedure. Let me refresh. Let me expand this. I can see all my operations. So I can see the second iteration is going on now. In the meantime, Let me go to my Azure Data Lake store and see. I can see the first file has been placed, which is based on accessories category. Let me go to my management studio and see how things have been recorded in my detail table. I can see two categories have been processed, and durations have been duration related to each category has been recorded too. Let me go back to my ADF. I can see still it is going through the values coming from lookup categories. Okay, everything is done, so no errors, which mean the code we have written worked well. Now if I go through the output window, I can see details of each activity, how it has been executed, inputs and outputs, time it has spent, and everything. So this is how you use lookup and for each activity with ADF. Okay, everything is done. So if you have any question, please let me know. You can email me, or you can simply put a comment, and then I'll make sure that you have the answer if you have any questions on this. Thanks for watching.